A father sees his son from a distance, and before the boy can say a single word of apology, the father is running toward him. That single detail, a father running, is so familiar to us now that we barely notice it. But to the people listening to Jesus tell this story for the first time, that one image would have stopped them cold. Because in the world Jesus lived in, a patriarch did not run. Ever. Running was for children, for servants, for people with no dignity left to protect. A man of that father's age and standing hiking up his robes and sprinting down a public road was not touching. It was scandalous. And Jesus knew exactly what he was doing when he put that detail in. Once you understand what it actually costs that father to run, this story stops being a gentle bedtime tale about forgiveness and becomes something far more radical. A picture of a God who is willing to look ridiculous in public for the sake of getting to you 1 second sooner. Let's set the scene properly. Luke 15. Jesus is telling this parable to a mixed crowd, tax collectors and sinners pressing in close to listen, and Pharisees and scribes standing off to the side grumbling that Jesus welcomes sinners and eats with them. That grumbling is the reason the story exists at all. Jesus tells 3 parables back to back in this chapter: a lost sheep, a lost coin, and finally this one, a lost son, each one aimed directly at explaining why he keeps eating dinner with exactly the kind of people the religious leaders think he should be avoiding. The story itself? A man has 2 sons. The younger one comes to his father and says, "Give me the share of property that is coming to me." Luke 15:12. Stop right there, because that request alone is already a kind of violence. In that culture, asking for your inheritance while your father is still alive was functionally saying, "I wish you were already dead." Inheritance only transferred at death. Asking for it early was treating your living father as if he had already stopped existing to you. And remarkably, the father agrees. He divides the property between his 2 sons. No lecture, no refusal, just compliance with a request that must have felt like a knife. The younger son gathers everything and leaves for a far country, and there he squanders his property in reckless living. Luke 15:13. The word behind reckless living, asotos, carries the sense of a life poured out wastefully, dissolute, with nothing left to show for it. And it does not take long. A famine hits the land. He runs out of money at the exact moment he can least afford to, and he ends up hiring himself out to feed pigs. For a Jewish audience, this detail alone was the bottom of the barrel. Pigs were unclean animals under the law. A Jewish son tending pigs for a Gentile employer, so hungry he longed to eat the very pods the pigs were eating, was about as far from home, identity, and dignity as the story could possibly place him. And then comes the turn. Luke 15:17. But when he came to himself, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread, but I perish here with hunger?" Came to himself. That phrase deserves a second look, because it is doing more work than a casual reading gives it credit for. This is not simply the son feeling guilty. It is the language of someone waking up from a kind of trance, someone who has been living so far outside of who he actually is that returning to reality feels like waking from sleep. He had lost himself before he ever lost the money. He rehearses a speech. "Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants." Luke 15:18. 1:9. That is a carefully He is not asking to be reinstated as a son. He knows that door, by every social rule of his world, is closed. He is asking for the lowest possible position, a hired hand, someone who works for wages and sleeps somewhere else at night. It is the most he thinks he can reasonably hope for. And now the detail that changes everything. Luke 15:20. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion, and ran and embraced him and kissed him. His father saw him while he was still a long way off. That single phrase tells you the father had been watching. Not casually. Not by coincidence. A man does not spot a distant figure on a road and immediately recognize his own son unless he has been looking down that road for a very long time. This father had been scanning the horizon, day after day, hoping. The waiting itself was already an act of love that cost him something visible to his whole community. A grown man in a position of authority, publicly, repeatedly checking a road for a son who had, by every social measure, disgraced the family. But it is what happens next that would have made the original audience gasp. He ran. To understand why running mattered so much, you have to understand how a man like this father was expected to carry himself. He was the head of a household, likely a man of some means given how much property he had to divide. In an honor-based Mediterranean culture, a patriarch's dignity was his most valuable possession, and dignity in that world was inseparable from a slow, deliberate, unhurried way of moving through public space. Elders walked. They did not run. Running exposed the legs beneath a long robe, which was considered humiliating for a man of standing. Running was undignified, something children did chasing each other through the street, something servants did when summoned, not something the head of a household did in front of the entire village. And this village would have been watching. News of the younger son's disgraceful departure would have traveled fast in a small community. His return, ragged and reeking of the pigpen he had just crawled out of, would have drawn eyes immediately. There is even an old, well-documented Jewish and Middle Eastern custom called the kezazah, the cutting-off ceremony, in which a community would break a large clay pot in front of a son who had squandered his inheritance among Gentiles and lost the family's honor, publicly declaring him cut off from his own people. Whether or not that specific ritual is standing behind this exact parable, the social reality it reflects is real. A son who came home in this condition could expect public shaming, not an embrace, and certainly not from a village that had watched him walk out the door with his father's wealth in the first place. The father runs to get there first. Think about the mechanics of that decision for a second. If the son has to walk the full distance into the village alone, exposed the entire way, the community gets there before the father does. The jeers, the stares, the whispered judgments, all of it lands on the boy before any word of welcome can. The father, seeing him a long way off, makes a split-second calculation. The only way to reach his son before the shame does is to run. So he hikes up his robe, the humiliating posture itself, and sprints down the public road in full view of the entire village, absorbing the scandal onto himself before it can touch his son. He takes the indignity so that his son does not have to walk through it alone. This is the detail almost every casual reading of this story misses entirely. The father does not simply forgive his son once the son arrives and apologizes. The father runs out ahead of the apology, ahead of the shame, ahead of the whole rehearsed speech, and absorbs the public humiliation of an undignified sprint so that his son's homecoming is met with an embrace instead of a gauntlet of contempt. And watch what happens to the speech the son had so carefully prepared. He starts it. Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Luke 15:21. And that is as far as he gets. He never finishes the line about being treated as a hired servant, because the father is not interested in negotiating a demotion. Before the boy can even ask for the lowest position, the father is already calling for the best robe, a ring for his finger, sandals for his feet, and a feast. Every one of those items is a restoration of status, not a consolation prize. The robe marks him as an honored guest. The ring, likely a signet ring, signifies authority and family identity. The sandals mark him as a son of the house, not a servant, since servants in that world typically went barefoot while sons wore sandals. The father is not simply forgiving a debt. He is publicly, visibly, unmistakably restoring a son who had, by every social rule of the day, forfeited the right to be called one. And the feast, killing the fattened calf reserved for the most significant celebrations, is Jesus' answer to the grumbling Pharisees standing at the edge of the crowd listening to this whole parable unfold. This is why I eat with sinners. This is what the Father does. He does not wait at the threshold with arms crossed until sufficient penance is performed. He runs. He absorbs the shame that should have landed on the returning child. He restores before the apology is even finished being spoken. There is a second son in this story too, and Jesus does not let him disappear from the parable, which matters more than most tellings of this story give it credit for. The older brother, working in the field, hears music and dancing, and refuses to go in. When his father comes out to plead with him, he unloads years of resentment. All these years I served you, and I never disobeyed your command, yet you never gave me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. Luke 15:29. And here is the quiet ache buried in that complaint. The older son thinks of his relationship with his father as a transaction, years of service owed a corresponding payout, and he has been keeping score the entire time, resentful that the math never seemed to work in his favor. He stands outside the celebration not because the door was closed to him, but because he cannot bring himself to walk through a door his brother did not earn. And the father goes out to him too. The same father who ran down the road for one son now walking out into the field for the other, saying, "Son, you are always with me, and all that I have is yours." Luke 15:31. Both sons had the same father. One thought love had to be paid for by suffering long enough in the far country. The other thought it had to be paid for by working hard enough at home. Neither of them understood that the father's love was never for sale in the first place. It was simply his, offered before either son could produce anything to deserve it. This is why this story is usually called the parable of the prodigal son, but it might be more accurately named the parable of the running father. The son's rebellion, though vivid, is not actually the center of gravity in this story. It is the ordinary, expected human failure the whole parable assumes from the start. The extraordinary thing, the detail Jesus wanted his listeners to sit with long after the story ended, is a father who watched the road every day, who ran when dignity said to walk, who took on public shame so his son would not have to carry it alone, and who restored full sonship before a single word of penance was finished being spoken. So what do you do with a story like this? If you've ever felt like the far country, whatever yours looked like, disqualified you from coming home, look again at what the father did before the son ever finished his sentence. He did not wait for a flawless apology. He ran to meet an unfinished one. If you have ever felt more like the older brother, keeping careful account of your own faithfulness and quietly resentful that grace looks too easy for everyone else, notice that the father came out to him too, gently, patiently, reminding him that everything was already his the whole time. He simply never stopped to receive it. Either way, on the road or in the field, the same father is running toward you before you finish explaining yourself, undignified, unhurried by shame, willing to look ridiculous in front of the whole village for the sake of getting to you 1 second sooner. If this changed how you read this story, subscribe, leave a comment, even one word. Share this with someone who has been standing at a distance, rehearsing an apology they think they need to finish before they can come home. Pray for us as we keep digging into these texts. And may the one who runs down the road toward you remind you that the embrace comes before the explanation ever does. God bless you.